Okay, we're going to be taking some time today to talk about the IELTS test and the things we can expect from that test. We will be talking about the general test and the academic, but we are not going to be talking today about specific questions or strategies. This is an orientation of the test. We will talk about the different sections, but more importantly, we're going to be talking about our plans and our goals and how the plan that we have will tell us what we need to do with our IELTS test. So let's talk about those two different tests. We have our IELTS General and our IELTS Academic. The big difference between these two tests is the purpose that you have for taking the test. It's not very different in terms of structure or the information on the test. The big difference is your purpose or your plan. So we all have a different plan for the academic program that we want to go to. We all have a different plan for immigration or maybe something else. The purpose that you take the test is going to be the biggest difference between the general and academic. The skills that you need to do well on both of these tests are very, very similar. The structure of the tests are very similar. The main difference is just why you are taking these two tests. Let's talk more about the why. The academic IELTS is for trained professionals or people who are trying to become trained professionals. We're talking to our software or IT specialists, our engineers, our doctors. If you're thinking about getting a master's degree, the academic IELTS is the test for you. The reason that we call this test academic, of course, the subjects are more academic or more advanced, but really the material that we have for the reading, for the listening, these will be taken directly from academic journals, studies, important international news, or even textbooks. So you can imagine opening a textbook for psychology. You should be able to understand that information, be able to share that information, write about the information, and manipulate the information to make ideas about what you learned. We should be very, very comfortable with academic vocabulary, academic materials. So many people ask that they have looked through all of the academic tests, they've done a lot of practice tests, but they want to continue to increase their skills. They ask what kind of studying they should do. For the academic IELTS, you should be very comfortable with almost any kind of information, but textbooks, university or college material, the journals, like I was talking about before, these are the best places to begin. We should be caring about our spelling and our vocabulary and having a complete understanding of the materials that we're using. By the time you're prepared for an academic test, because it is so competitive, when you look at the materials, you should be feeling an 85 to 90% minimum of comfort with the material that you're looking at. Our reading and listening will be taken directly from those academic journals and others, but the writing is really where things are very different from the general IELTS. The writing test is much more advanced, and it will be assessed at a level that is competitive for college. So what this means is that we are going to pay more attention to our clarity. We want to have not just good grammar, but a variety of good grammatical structure for specific or special situations. We want to be very careful with our word choice and being as specific as possible for the idea that we're trying to explain. And for both tests, spelling counts. So for those of us who don't love spelling, this is important, getting into that routine of repetition, not just studying the academic vocabulary, but making sure that we have the spelling correct as well. This is a big way where people lose points on the test that they didn't really need to lose. So for the general IELTS, we do not need to be so concerned about the academic ideas here. We can think of this test as being more similar to survival level English, where the reading and listening that you will do will be focused on work manuals, the rules for a workplace, notices, a guidebook for tourism. This is much more common kind of reading and listening. The listening could be about a situation on a bus or a situation in public transport. So we can think about these as survival level. The test itself is more focused on general immigration or non-skilled workers. So that should give us an idea about the difference levels or the difference in levels between the academic and the general. Something to keep in mind is that just because you're going to college doesn't mean that you need the academic program. A very important thing to remember here is to always check with your institution. You might be surprised at the language requirements for the college that you're trying to go to. Maybe it's higher than you were expecting, but oftentimes it's much lower than what people were expecting. Usually a 6 to a 6.5 makes you pretty competitive to get into the college that you're looking for. The writing skills will be assessed at a much different level than the academic test. So in the academic test, we're talking about graphs and charts, writing a full essay. But the writing skill for general IELTS is going to be at the level of correspondence. So what that means is writing a letter or an email to a friend, a colleague from work, a coworker. More important than having all the different structures that we want to show off in the academic side, what we want to do for the general writing is focus on clarity and focus on the tone of the writing. How should our language change depending on if we're sending an email to our old friend or if we're sending an email to our boss or a colleague? The tone becomes very, very important for both of the tests, but on the general IELTS especially, because it's not just academic tone. The main ideas that I want to express here for the academic and general. One way or the other, we're focusing on school purposes or immigration purposes. We still have to be in contact with our school because sometimes they say that the general IELTS is acceptable. So we need to call or we need to email our school or our workplace, our institution. We need to be very specific with what test we need and what score. We don't want to spend the money more than once on the test. You might be surprised by the requirements of the job or the school that you want to go to. So definitely communicate with them. We also know from what we've just talked about that the sections of the test are generally exactly the same. Therefore, general IELTS prep can be very good to help with your academic IELTS preparation. And academic IELTS will be very strong practice for your general IELTS. We are always looking for new tests, new materials to work with. Therefore, using the general when you're studying for the academic or vice versa is really good. It's strong practice and it gets you into the rhythm of the different sections and the kinds of questions that we're talking about. So a big question right now, because so much of us, or so many of us are at home, what test is best? The IELTS, the CELPIP, the Duolingo, and why are they the best? Of course, there's other tests that are not being mentioned here, but these three seem to be the ones that most of the people that I talk to are coming and asking questions about. So this is what I've focused on here. The biggest difference is here, how we can use the test, and in my opinion, the accessibility of the test is very important. So IELTS is an international test. It can bring you to Canada, of course, but it can also bring you to a job in the United States, college in Australia, Ireland, wherever it is that you're looking to go, where they speak English as a first language, the IELTS will help you get there. The CELPIP will not help you go anywhere. The CELPIP is just a Canadian immigration test. Oftentimes, for people who are going to Canada, they prefer the CELPIP. They say that it feels a little bit easier than the IELTS. The skills that are tested are pretty much exactly the same. The only big difference that I would see between the IELTS and the CELPIP is the speaking sections are very, very different. In the IELTS, the speaking section is maybe 10 to 15 minutes. It's only 3 questions that we need to speak about. On the CELPIP test, there's at least 8 questions, sometimes one more, depending on the structure of the questions. And it's a lot more advanced for the things that they're asking you to do. So if you are someone who experiences some anxiety in the testing environment, maybe the speaking on the CELPIP would be more difficult for you than the IELTS. But the best way, of course, look at the practice tests and get an idea about the timing and how comfortable you will be. Recently, the Duolingo has become very popular. I think that this is a great option. It is definitely more accessible than the other tests, which means you can do it at home, you can do it on your computer. It's cheaper than the other 2 tests. So especially for colleges in Canada these days, if you are able to use the Duolingo test, definitely that's the choice. It saves you some money and it accomplishes the exact same thing as the other tests. So what are these tests actually accomplishing? These test scores, at least for the Canadian context, will give you your CLB, your Canada Language Benchmark. These are the rules for the levels of English just in Canada. Let's keep the idea of CLB score in our mind, because I'm going to talk more about this later on when we talk about resumes and the other things that we can use our test scores for. So, another huge question, what English level should I have? This is a confusing one because there's a lot of different ideas out there. Some people want to go really fast to get their score. Other people want to have the highest score possible, so they study general English for a long time. There's a traditional answer to this question, which says that you should be starting to study for IELTS at the upper intermediate to advanced level of English. I'm here to say that that traditional idea is not necessarily true. The most important thing is your plan and how your plan will determine what test you need and what score you need. So let's talk more about that. Why is the traditional idea that upper intermediate or advanced is the best idea? This is an idea designed by language schools. So they want you to go from their beginning class all the way to their advanced or upper intermediate, and then they want you to go to the IELTS class. This is not necessarily a bad thing. I will always say that having as much general English as possible is a good idea. But for some people, you do not need that high of a level of English because maybe you don't need that high of a score on the test. So the example that I have written here, one person can have a band 4 on the IELTS, another can have a band 8. Both can achieve immigration or acceptance into a program depending on the plan that they have. And they can both meet each other living in Calgary for a coffee. This is what we're going to talk about now. So the different plans. The plans that I'm talking about are usually spoken about with the word pathways. Pathways is a confusing word because there's 2 meanings. I want to talk about that now. So pathways, the first meaning is about the government. So the government has created these plans to help people get into the workforce or into immigration in the country. So we have the government plan, and then we also have the Pathways program, another idea that has been created by Canadian colleges. The Pathways program is supposed to be a short program. Sometimes it's not. It can be very expensive. Around $1,000 a month is pretty much the average. But the Pathways program allows you to get into the school or into the study that you're looking for without taking the IELTS test or without taking any kind of language test. At first, that sounds very attractive, but a lot of the people that I've worked with have come to me while in a Pathways program. They were promised that it would last for 2 months, but they've been there for 6 months. They've been there for 8 months. This happens a lot more than colleges would like to tell us. I will always say that studying for the test, or at least practicing your general English, then taking the test, is always the cheapest option, and it's the option that gives you the most control over your life. If you enter into a Pathways program, there's the teacher and the institution that determines your final score. It's not just studying for a test and taking the test. Another thing about pathways is that for people who have not studied a lot of general English or who are not comfortable with their general English, the pathways does not help you increase your general English. It helps your college skills. So this is like presentation making or writing an essay. If you don't have good general English skills, you will stay in the pathways program for a long, long time. Maybe you'll need a tutor. Maybe you will need to go have a private session with a teacher or go to another general English class to increase those skills. This is a lot of money. More importantly, I think it's a lot of time. We have a saying in Canada where time is money, but money is also money. We want fast practice. We want cheap practice, maybe even free practice. The pathways is none of those things. Let's look at the example that I have above here, where I'm saying we have a caregiver compared to an older couple looking for PR. Neither of these people need a pathways program. They're not trying to go to college. One is trying to go to work. The other couple is looking for permanent residency. We do not need a college to achieve these purposes. The caregiver program is available right now as a government plan, a government pathway. The IELTS score that you need is between 3.5 to a 4. So that's a very, it's not a competitive score. It's pretty low, but that's enough English to go around your life in Toronto or Vancouver or whatever city you go to. It will allow you to operate and live inside the city. You will still be confused. You will still need to improve your general English, but you can get the job with a 4 on the IELTS. A lot of the people who I've given this presentation to or had this conversation with, they could have already taken the IELTS and gotten a 4. How do you know if you have that ability? Talk to somebody who knows. Do a practice test. It's always a good idea to have a clear and accurate idea of what your score will be before you pay for the test. Save your money. Now for the other option, an older couple looking for PR. Maybe because they're a little bit older, they have a little bit of money. They don't want to start a new career. They just want to immigrate and get their permanent residency. The Pathways program, again, is not for you. The general IELTS will be enough. And because of the point system for immigration, maybe they want to have the highest score possible, depending on other things in their life. Maybe a 6 or a 7 is enough for PR, and you have a very attractive application. Everybody's a little bit different. Now, as a disclaimer, I am absolutely not an immigration consultant or a specialist. I study the tests. I know about general English, and I've been working with students who are trying to pass the test for a long time. If you ever are looking for immigration help or consultancy, you can contact me. I have some people that I could recommend for you. The big takeaway about the Pathways program here is that it can be good for those of us who want to go to college, but the cheapest and most effective, maybe even the fastest option, study for your test. This will be the best option for you. You will not regret not taking a Pathways program. So I was talking before about general English, how the recommendation that I will always have is that general English is number 1. Why? Why do I care so much about general English? Because in your IELTS preparation class, you're studying the IELTS. You're studying question types and strategies, possibly that you may never see again for the rest of your life. The strategies are always useful, but the questions that you see on the test, you're probably not going to see something like that again. The IELTS preparation helps you for the IELTS, but it doesn't build your general English practice. When I'm working with a student, I always do both. I always focus on the IELTS plus general English support. If you're not totally comfortable with our general English, and a lot of us aren't, having the support of a general English class inside of an IELTS class is extremely important, and it's something very, very different that 95% of the schools, the language colleges in Canada, do not teach both at the same time. And I would say even for your online courses, this is very rare to find, even though it makes the most sense. Why does it make sense? Because if you are repeating the same errors on the IELTS test, we should take 30 minutes to reteach that grammar idea, give you the general English class that you can study on your own time. You have an email, or you have a write-up that you can refer back to. This is very important to stop making that mistake. Repeating the questions every day is not going to help you if you're not really understanding the things that you didn't get correct the first time. Having that understanding is really what makes the difference between people who get the score and people who maybe struggle, take tests 3 or 4 times. Maybe they get lucky. There's a wide difference between these two groups, and that difference is general English help. The IELTS studying helps your IELTS score. It helps your IELTS strategies. It helps you understand the questions, but you're really practicing the skills you already have. If you're not taking that test soon, keep practicing the general English and become as advanced as possible. So concerning the test, we know that we have at least 4 sections: our reading, speaking, listening, writing. There's a little bit of confusion where some people are surprised that there's no grammar knowledge section. If you haven't seen a practice test yet, but you're thinking about taking the test, take a look at a practice test immediately, just to get the idea of what the test looks like. There's no grammar knowledge section. You will not need to answer a question about the present perfect continuous or the second conditional or any grammatical structure. We want our grammar knowledge to be on display in every single answer that we give. For our reading and listening, that's not so possible because it's multiple choice. But for our speaking and our writing, we want to have a variety of grammatical devices that we can use. We want to show off. We want it to look like art at the end of our test. This is not an easy thing to do, but the grammar knowledge section is everywhere. We really want our writing to be as interesting and beautiful as possible. That's what separates the lower scores from the higher scores. Oftentimes people want to know, is there one section that's very hard? No, the test is not designed to trick you or deceive you. In my opinion, from the tests that I've taken, I think that the most demanding section is the writing section, because there's a lot of structure that goes into the writing, where so many of us start with our speaking and we want to practice our speaking all the time, but sometimes we forget, or sometimes we don't want to do the writing practice. So I think writing is always something to increase and always something to learn the structure about. There's a structure for how to write your essays or write your correspondence. If you memorize that structure, your points will immediately increase as long as you can repeat that on the test. Which section is the most important? There is no section that's the most important. We want to give the same amount of time to all of our studies and all of our sections, because each one is worth 25%. Don't just focus on your speaking because it makes you nervous. Spend equal time on all of your skills. You will be very happy that you spent equal time developing all your skills. So if I've spent all this money on the test, if I've spent all my time studying, and finally I have my score, what else can I use it for? The truth is, not a lot. We can put our language level score on the resume, but we're not going to list it as an IELTS score because most Canadians do not know what IELTS is. We are going to translate that score, at least in Canada. We're going to translate it to the CLB score that I was talking about before. So on your resume, you're going to write Canada Language Benchmark level, whatever your level is. This name makes sense to Canadian people. We understand what a benchmark is. We understand the level. So this is more powerful and more attractive than IELTS level or CELPIP level. We don't know what those tests are. It's very uncommon for a Canadian to know what the IELTS is, so don't even use it. Use Canada Language Benchmark, write the words out completely. Your employer or the person that you're sending your CV to will understand. Other questions, should I list my score on the resume? Do people even care? Does my employer even care? Recently, I was working with a lady who was a lawyer from Brazil, but she got a job as a paralegal in Canada, in Toronto. So she did not take a test. She worked with me individually. We corrected the things in her general English that we needed to. And we listed on her resume that she has advanced proficiency in all skills in English. This was totally true, and the employer did not want an IELTS test or a CLB score. The employer loved the interview. So once again, this reinforces the idea about how your general English creates your interview. The general English is really what's important here. The interview skills, of course, are so important. The way your resume looks and the way your cover letter looks, is it according to Canadian standards? That's so important. I would not stress about having the IELTS score, but if you do pay the money, translate into a Canada language benchmark score and put it on your resume. Why not? So a lot of us, of course, we're coming from countries that are not Canada. Do we want to study with non-native speakers? From my experience, I've taught in all kinds of language colleges. I've been teaching English and test prep for the better part of the last 10 years. Absolutely, yes, you can have great classes with non-native speakers. Some of the best teachers I know are people who are coming from different countries, but the difference with them is that they've been living in Canada or the United States for a long time, and they have been in touch with the culture. So this is the big difference between the non-native speaking teacher who can help you and the non-native speaking teacher who maybe reinforces some bad habits. We make our bad habits so quickly, and then it takes forever to remove them. So certain things like accent reduction are very valuable for IELTS and for your normal life. But if your non-native speaker or if your non-native teacher has been in touch with the culture in Canada, the United States, if they understand that culture, they will be able to help you with this. But if they don't, this will be something that's very challenging for you to improve in that class. There is a cultural aspect to English learning. We want to care about the tone, the ways our voices go up and down. We want to care about vocabulary. Phrasal verbs are sometimes a nightmare for people. Understanding that there are words that go together just because. They're called collocations, so we can study them. But if we don't have those ideas, if we don't have that information from the culture, it becomes very difficult to achieve the kinds of levels that we want. So this is definitely something to keep in mind. Can your non-native speaking teacher help you? Yes, they can. But we have to be careful with who we choose. When are you ready for this test? My goal when I'm working with someone is very, very specific. It doesn't matter if you want a band 4 or a band 8 or a perfect score of a band 9, which is, of course, very challenging. But no matter who you are and no matter what your plan is, by the time you're ready to take the test, you should be exhausted, bored. You should be very, very tired with the kinds of questions that you see and the strategies that you need to answer that question. So hopefully by the time you take the test, you see the official test, you understand what kind of question they're asking of you. Then you can use your strategies to maybe go through the reading in a specific way to get your answer very, very quickly. The timing of the test is fast-paced. Even though it's almost 3 hours, you will want as much time as possible. So having a good strategy and knowing what strategy to use first for your sections will become very, very important for saving those extra minutes. There is some good news. Even though the test can seem very scary, the best news here is that this is not a pass-fail test. Everybody passes, just with different scores. Like we said before, depending on your plan, a score that's really good for one person might not be good for you. This is an important thing to think about. The best idea to get that score is to work with someone at least once, maybe, before you take the test, so you can have an accurate idea of what grade is possible for you. You should definitely include ideas like your anxiety level. If you are very anxious, but you're calm at home, you can expect for your test score to be a little bit different on test day. But having someone explain to you what your grade could be and why before the test, very, very important, very useful to help us relax. If you are interested in immigration to Atlantic Canada, the east of Canada, or if you're very brave and you want to go to the north of Canada, your language requirement will be lower. So once again, focus on that plan, use the government resources to figure out what path is going to be used by you, and then we figure out what your study plan should be for the test. The job of the person who teaches you about the test is to understand your goal and help you create the plan to achieve it. So without that goal, it becomes a kind of practice that's not focused enough, and maybe you'll be unhappy with the results. Maybe you'll be unhappy with the class. The goal is the most important thing to understand what we need to do with the test. A construction worker needs different kinds of English compared to your IT person, right? So even though everyone's needs are different, everyone's score will be different, the test is really similar. We can study in similar ways, but we need that plan to understand how. So the most important thing that I want to take away from our conversation today, if you've heard about this video, or if you were here for the live class concerning this information, please contact me, introduce yourself, share your story. Even if you don't want to sign up for a program, I can always offer some advice. I have a lot of experience in this field. If you are interested in just asking the question that you have on your mind to see what I have to say about that, I will always contact you back. I'll always respond to the email or your Instagram chat, WhatsApp, whatever works best for you. Just share your story and let me know what it is that you're trying to do. I'll see what I can do to help. We're going to continue this conversation in the future by looking at the individual sections of the test, the speaking, reading, listening, and writing. We'll talk about those question types. We'll talk about the strategies that you can start practicing on your own time, and hopefully we'll help you get your score.